Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'd firstly like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which I am on, the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation. And I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners around Australia today, and all the First Nations people joining us. I'm a proud Warlpiri, Gurungi and Jawoyn woman from Katherine, Northern Territory, and I am the First Nations Community Engagement and Social Worker at Support Act. And joining me, co-hosting with me today is Mitch Tambo.
Yama. Welcome everyone to Support Act's second Yarning Strong. Tonight we'll be touching on some very important and difficult issues around suicide, self-harm, within the First Nations, within our deadly community. But before going any further, I'd better introduce myself. I'm a proud Gamilaroi man from Tamworth, northwest New South Wales. Grew up swimming in the river, eating $2 chips and a $1 can of Coke from the pet shop. And I'm blessed to be here as a singer-songwriter. And I've had, songs go out to different countries around the world. And tonight's going to be a beautiful night where we can just open up the dialogue around, much needed topics. So let's do it.
Let's meet our panelists. So joining us on our panel today is Deborah Cheatham, AO, Yorta Yorta woman, soprano, composer, an educator, and has become a leader and a pioneer in Australia's arts and landscape for more than 27 years. In 2009, Deborah Cheatham established Short Black Opera as a national non-for-profit opera company devoted to the development of Indigenous singers. The following year, she produced the premiere of her first opera, Pecan Summer. This landmark work was Australia's first Indigenous opera and has been a vehicle in the development of new generation of Indigenous opera singers. Deborah describes herself as a 21st century urban woman who is Yorta Yorta by birth, stolen generation by policy, soprano by diligence, composer by necessity, and lesbian by practice. Welcome, Deborah. Next on our panel is Jimmy Kyle. So he's from an Aboriginal-led punk rock band called Chasing Ghost, and is a Thungari man. Jimmy Kyle is from the mid-north coast of New South Wales. He speaks and writes with a potent mind. The band uses their voice to highlight issues that modern-day Australians is struggling to reckon with. Among those topics are PTSD sufferers by war veterans, the hardship of parenting when young, Australia's treatment of Aboriginal people through history, including current day, the inequity still faced by First Nations people. Chasing Ghosts' story continues to build the momentum and is only just starting to gather real speed. So welcome, Jimmy. And also joining us is Jettison Wells. So Jettison Wells is your Wallarei woman, I hope I'm saying that right, from Tharawal land, working on Gadigal country as a narrative therapist. Her business, Habodjiling? Yeah, that's okay. Narrative practice focus on people unpacking shame for what it really is, just another opinion. And in navigating the world of work, having known personally the demands and constructs of community service, redundancy, working overseas, returning to work after parenting, working as a single parent, poverty, homelessness, and stereotyping. She thinks she knows a little about how people contribute to the economy and community and country today. As a grandmother, she is learning and sharing her ancestral language, and the use of, and just trying to revive the use of the language within her community. So welcome, Jettison. So before we start our session, I just want to let everyone know that if you are feeling triggered at all by anything that we say within this session, please feel free to call the helpline below. That's 1-800-959-500. And we will also be putting some after hour numbers in the chat if you do need to access it while within this discussion. So I guess the few things that I wanted to talk about before we start our conversation is mental health triggers within the arts community. So a lot of people within the arts community and the music community in general, when working in environments such as this, mental health triggers can include low or irregular income, which we're all experiencing quite potently right now in the arts and music community. Fewer safety nets, working environment can be late hours, working within the arts community. It's very transient. It's a competitive environment, it's short term, and there's a lot of physical strain involved. So these are impacts within music. And then we've got our factors as First Nations people that we deal with, and factors that contribute to suicide and self-harm, disempowerment, which is massive given our history, mental health issues, substance abuse, which stems from mental health issues, sexual trauma, loss of land and culture, transgenerational trauma, grief and loss, racism, social exclusion, stolen generation, incarceration, poverty, denied our rights. We live in third world conditions, lack of education and work opportunity. It's pretty massive within our First Nations community what we deal with on a mental health level. And some just to give you a bit of context about what First Nations people go through, we have a stat, and this is war veterans versus First Nations people. So our defence and veteran suicide rate is about 25 suicides per year between 2001 and 2017. Compare that to the First Nations suicide, it's 149 between 2012 and 2018. So that's 6 times higher than the Veteran and Defence Force suicide rates. And they have a Royal Commission into their suicide rates, yet we see no Royal Commission into our First Nations suicide rate currently. So that's just a bit of context of what I want to give you guys today, and let's start the discussion. So I'll hand it over to you, Mitch.
Coming in, thank you, my sister. Before we get into it, just acknowledge that this is a sensitive conversation that we're having tonight. And again, if you do feel triggered or alarmed, please access the number as stated before and reach out, because this is what it's all about, is just sharing our stories and journey and open up that conversation to hopefully, come into our healing journey as a collective, and certainly in the art space. So first and foremost, I'd like to start with the matriarch of all matriarchs, Auntie Deborah Cheatham. Govinda, thank you again, Aunt. What a privilege it is to finally meet you on the online realm and be able to open up this conversation with you first and foremost. And I'd just like to acknowledge all of your incredible work, all of your pioneering, all of the hard work that you've put in to pave the way for many of us and inspire the next generations, no matter what gender, sexuality, all your resilience and everything that you continue to put out there is simply saving lives and just continuing to empower the next generation. So thank you so much for giving up some of your time this evening. And with that said, I would like to acknowledge that you were a part of the stolen generation, such a horrific time. And we know that kids are still being removed today. But with that said, I just wanted to direct this question your way to get your insight, and that is, something that impacts many of us as blackfellas, and certainly within the performing arts community, is identity. And, for us, unfortunately, our identity can be surrounded by the loss of culture, the loss of belonging, and connectiveness. And that can unfortunately lead to, severe mental health issues, substance abuse, but certainly suicide and self-harm. So with that said, how has your experience impacted your sense of identity? And how can a loss of identity impact our music and performing arts workers when working within the industry?
Well, Mitch, and to all the other panelists and to everybody who's here this evening, I want to thank you firstly for inviting me, for being here, for spending this important time together. And in answer to your very important and beautifully phrased question, I want to share something with you that's very precious to me. It's a little bit of my grandmother's language. My grandmother, Sissy McGee, a Yorta Yorta woman, born on Cumbragunja Mission Station. And it's this. Nyang nak niteldea imalang, wamaraman bunwarang waka. In lochpa Yorta Yorta, nyanak nunu galnyan yakuramja, yenbana bapparabanarak. Now, I'll translate that for you. I'm here on the land of the Bunwarang people. It's unceded land, part of the Kulin Nations. And in the language of Yorta Yorta, in the language of my grandmother, I pay my respects to the people who have been long time living here. We were having a little conversation before everybody came live into this space, and Jetta and I were talking about what it would have been like 20 years ago to have a conversation. Well, 20 years ago, I couldn't have shared that welcome with you. I couldn't have shared my grandmother's language. Part of my inheritance, I couldn't have shared that with you. And yet it's so very important that I can today. I have to say that there are so many layers to being layers of dispossession when you're a member of the stolen generations. And there's not one single person, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander on this continent, who isn't touched by stolen generation. I want to acknowledge that right up front. There are so many layers of dispossession, but one of the important ones that has been returned to me recently is this layer of language. Such an important tool for healing. But I have to say that for the first 30 years of my life, I was like, I don't know, I'll use a COVID times metaphor. I was like a jigsaw puzzle. How many of those have been done in the last 18 months? I was like a jigsaw puzzle with pieces missing and no picture on the box. I couldn't see myself represented in community. I'm a classical musician. Where were the classical musicians? I couldn't see myself represented. I also couldn't understand why it was I had to explain to people what stolen generations was and is, and that it was true and is true. And so I was struggling for the first 30 years of my life to piece my identity together. But do you know, Mitch, and everybody on this panel, and I think a lot of people listening tonight will understand this, music called me home. Music led me to the parts of my identity that are so essential. I've mentioned already language. Where does the language come from? It comes from the land. It was a song of my grandmother and her story of struggle and resistance in the 1939 walk-off from Cumbragunja that led me home to Yorta Yorta country. And since then, I've been able to connect with not only all that wonderful Yorta Yorta family, but also my grandfather's people, who are, rather than freshwater people like the Yorta Yorta, they're saltwater people, the Yuin people of the South Coast. It was a long journey, and I tell you, there were times when a panel like this could have really helped me, when I was questioning whether I actually could stay the course, whether I could remain this jigsaw puzzle in pieces. If there's been one consistent, leading and reassuring light in my life, it has been music. As First Nations peoples, it is written in our DNA. It is our way of knowing the world and giving meaning to everything in it. And all those times I wanted to harm myself, or maybe even contemplate not being here at all, I went back to the thing that is a light, is a beacon for me, and that was always music. And music was my inheritance. It was the inheritance given to me by my grandmother, my mother.
Wow, it's a lot to ponder there, but thank you for sharing and answering on such a deep level. And I think that's what tonight's all about, is just being able to share and also just sit back and open up your heart and spirit and receive. And I just, thank you for sharing that. That was beautiful. I think all of us out there could really feel that. Being called home by music, and a lot of what you've said there, I think, resonates with a lot of people. So thank you.
Mitch, if I can just add, I don't know what 5 minutes is, so please stop me if I go way too long, but I also want to say, I want to highlight the point that was a 30-year journey for me to find my way home. And I learned things every step of that journey. And you know, when I finally got there and I was embraced by my Yorta Yorta community and I started to learn all the things that were denied to me, I realized that if I'd gained all that knowledge all at once, I would not have been ready for it. A long time ago, I wrote a play called White Baptist ABBA Fan. It's what launched my career. That's how I used to consider myself, as a white Baptist ABBA fan, being brought up in a white family in the 70s, you know. But finding my way to being a gay Aboriginal opera singer, that was a journey, you know, and still is a journey. It's not a destination, it's a journey. So I encourage people, wherever you are on that journey, you might feel like you're never going to get there. You're learning things all the time along the way.
So with that said, Art, if I could just ask one simple question. I mean, a 30-year journey, you know, so much to go through, to work through, to then consume, or connecting the dots. If I could just ask you now, 30 years or so later, what does identity mean to you? What would your answer be to that?
It's belonging. Identity is belonging. I know the strength that I draw from my grandmother's country. I know when I stand in the shadow of Gulaga Mountain on the south coast of New South Wales and I draw in the energy of my grandfather's country, I know that completes my identity. It makes me whole. I'm not saying there isn't more to learn. There is. But, you know, I would also say that it's not a flippant idea to me that music is written into our DNA. Music is our way of knowing and being. We have the longest and oldest music practice in the world on this continent. And so I guess music isn't what I do, it's actually who I am by birthright and by necessity. And I'm just so grateful that I was able to make the best of the education that I did receive and receive a music education that set me up to find that identity and that belonging.
Beautiful. Thanks, Aunt. Jimmy Kyle, the strong Tangari man. My brother, I'm led to believe, and in doing a bit of a stalk of your amazing Insta page and whatnot, that your main focus is around using your voice to highlight the treatment of our mob throughout history to the present day, and the inequality and inequity that we are still faced in our many different diverse communities. So with that said, my brother, that's a big task. I love it. In your opinion, how can intergenerational trauma lead to suicide and self-harm? And I know that to a lot of mob out there or mob here on the panel, that could be an easy, pretty transparent question. But I'm really interested to hear your perspective, because it, as you know, it's very layered. It is intricate, and we're all affected so differently. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind answering that, brother, please.
Yeah, back to you, my brother. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on Wurundjeri country today, pay my respect to their elders, past and present, and acknowledge all your mobs here, all the mobs that are tuning in, and of course my own people back home in the Macleay Valley on Tungari country. It sort of goes to Aunt's point. I'd never heard it so succinctly put, that the jigsaw puzzle, the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. And when I think about my relationship with music, for me, seeing my uncles get up and sing, that's, my cousins sing. I went home recently and everyone was playing, and that was great. That was deadly. And I think something that needs to be understood around intergenerational trauma is there's a group consciousness, there's a group consciousness about as Aboriginal people. And what a lot of gubbars don't understand, a lot of what white fellas don't understand, a lot of my fans that are white, a lot of my supporters that are white, is that the Aboriginal identity was changed, was fundamentally changed forever. Because once upon a time, our people existed in their present state. And now forever, we carry the burden of knowing what's happened. We're always reminded we're in the invasion. The invasion didn't leave. And we survive and thrive in spite of what's occurred. Someone could argue the point, for example, around the stolen generations. Well, look, Deborah, how well you've done. That was that old white mentality that somehow we had asked for this. Somehow we had provoked something, that there was a duty being served. But in reality, it's in spite of what's occurred, people still achieve. It's not because of what's occurred. It's in spite of what's occurred. It says the deep sense of resilience we have as a peoples. When I think of that group consciousness, we've forever changed our identity. We will never not be in an occupied country unless we have treaty and have conversation about healing. So when it came to music, as I got older, I realized it wasn't about me. And if I really wanted to be happy as a musician, it had to be about everyone else. It had to be worthwhile. And being worthwhile for me was about sharing my small platform with all the different opportunities that I have, was to share that voice to a wide audience in a way that might capture their heart. And I think the part that people don't understand about intergenerational trauma is when you're made to feel small and then you've got your language taken. So you speak a foreigner's language like English, and you call things that are intimate to you, like your Nora, your country, when you have to call it by European names because you can't find those Aboriginal words in your mouth anymore because you weren't given them to find in your mouth. So then you got to track it down. Then you got to become a detective. So on the days where you're made to feel small, whether you're walking past statues of murderers like Angus McMillan, or slavers like Robert Towns of Townsville, or John Mackay of Mackay, or Ben Boyd of Boydtown, that's not lost on our mob. We know that we are we are living and trying to be polite to the descendants that have benefited so much from the dispersal of our people. Even to tell our story, we have to so delicately tell it, for fear of brittle ears on fragile white people. And then the victim blaming, it comes around back to us. That somehow we are the reminder of the original sin. So intergenerationally, what that trauma is, a young Aboriginal person is born in to having his country occupied immediately. He's born into tracking down his language, or her language, or their language. He's born in to tracking down the missed parts of everything. It's all gone. And so then we have to come back, just like Aunt, you know, how she said, and put the puzzle back together. Each of us is putting these puzzles back together, sharing what we know with one another. But when you're not a full person, because it's been robbed of you, you can't, if you can't see a full person, how can you love a full person? So you look in the mirror and you don't see a full person, you know. So you gotta find this way to reparent, nearly, to find this new love in yourself, so then you can give it to other people. I see what intergenerational trauma has done throughout our communities, throughout my family, and when people can't operate and function positively, you don't just hand down all them good things to your family, but you also hand down the struggles and the burdens and the few strategies you're given to deal with something monumental. And those few strategies, sometimes we fall short, and our kids then have to grow up with that as well. Wherever our children are going to go in life, they will know what has occurred here, because it will follow them like a shadow. And this is a difficult thing, and it is not our job alone to heal from this. The silence in this country is deafening. And instead of every time us being asked to explain ourselves, to justify our pain, I say that our allies need to find their voice. They need to speak up. And those, you know, I don't blame white fellas, contemporary white fellas today, for what's occurred in the past. You can't be blamed for what you didn't do. I get that. But they must understand that they are most definitely the beneficiaries of what has occurred. And it has been done in their name. And they have a responsibility to step up. And if they truly believe that this is a country of a first world country with a democracy and that cares about its people, then let me see it. I'm tired of hearing shallow, empty words. And I don't want my children to hear those shallow, empty words. And I don't want their grandchildren to hear it, because they're going to be born into the same occupied country that I've been born into. The same country that says sovereignty only matters if it's English land. Then their sovereignty matters, but not our sovereignty. If it's their land, if England's entitled to its sovereignty, then, you know, which they made a big point of with their recent Brexit pullout, that they were making their own decisions for sovereignty. They didn't want someone in Belgium telling them what to do. Well, guess what? We relate to you on that fact as well. We don't want you telling us what to do. And I think it's time that our young people, how do we heal from generations of this, when right now there's a denialism in the country that we don't learn about the frontier wars. We don't learn about these slavery. We've got a prime minister that denied that slavery ever happened. So what does that tell an Aboriginal person? It tells us that we're not to be seen, that we're not to be heard, that our history is not to be listened to, that our pain is not real, that their brittle ears can't hear the truth. And if they do, then we are the problem for bringing it to their attention. Now, I just use one little passage, in the Bible, and I'm not a religious person by any means, but there's an old saying which it comes from the Bible, which is, we inherit the sins of our forefathers. Well, here we are, and what a mess we have. And it's incredible, in my belief, that we do so well. We punch above our weight all the time. We are some of the most talented, most incredible minds in our community, and the sporting athleticism is world class. And we did that in spite of our country not wanting us, in spite of our leaders not representing us, in spite of their silence, in spite of their apathy rather than their empathy. We still have achieved. And I believe, if nothing else, our generations of the future shall be inspired by that. But we will be unpacking intergenerational trauma for many generations to come. We are in the invasion. This is not ended.
Strong words, my brother. Now, before I move on over to my deadly co-host, Carissa, I've got one question for you. I'm going to put a bit of pressure on you, see how you can just sum it up, because I don't know if it can be. So here we go, my brother. How does, we know, right, intergenerational trauma plays a massive role, and it certainly plays a role within the arts community. So how does intergenerational trauma play that role within the creative space, and with our mob within the industry? When we go to shows, when we go to concerts, events and things like that, how is, I suppose, intergenerational trauma birthed out of the spirit and into words and into the creative space? Where do we see that, and how do we see that?
Well, I think even, so many of our performances, it's about storytelling. First, we've got to be able to name it. So we've got to name it, we've got to be able to talk to it, we've got to pull it out of the dark and pull it into the light. And we are all storytellers. We are born storytellers. Just like Aunt said, that we've got that song in our DNA. We got that yarn in us too. We can't help but share. You asked me a 5-minute question, 11 minutes later, I was still going. So that's what I'm talking about. So we've got that thing that we like to have yarn, and share that story. And we've got to just pull this stuff out of the dark, keep pulling it into the light. And I think that's what our performers do, whether, when you sung, on telly there, and I seen you singing in lingo, people don't realize how hard it would have been for you to access that lingo. We all know. But that's that thing, that storytelling. So how we occupy our spaces, that we are defiant in spite of all this. So I think in the art space, it's about sharing story, and what the arts have done so well to help to unpack intergenerational trauma is to create empathy with our audiences through being able to simulate the experience to some degree in their mind by hearing our stories. We place them in that place. So I think it's back to storytelling, my brother.
Love it. Well said. Carissa, do you think, my sister?
That was really amazing and beautiful. All of you really hit home for me, because, there's so many layers upon layers upon layers of what we as First Nations people go through. And it's amazing that we're here today and we're continue to thrive and survive in the conditions that we are in today. So Jettison, I just wanted to cross over to you. So as a narrative therapist, what are your views on suicide and self-harm within First Nations people? And what are some things people can look out for when they feel that there is no return, when they feel like their sovereignty is not being ceded, or their voices aren't being heard? How can we support our mob and uplift our mob?
Thanks, guys. You know what? First up, I just want everyone that's watching to really think about the fact that we're actually the answers to prayers that were made 200 years ago. Like our ancestors fought bloody hard to ensure that I could learn the Yuwalari language, that, you know, Mitch could go out there, Mitch and Jimmy could go out there and sing. I think we forget sometimes that, you know, those hopes and dreams that people were begging for, that people were praying for, that people were fighting for 200 years ago, we're here. We're standing right here. Okay, we make up, you know, all of that stuff. Unfortunately, what comes with that is an incredible pressure. At the moment, we're going through COVID. We may or may not have lost our job. We may or may not, you know, be making money. You know, we're experiencing the same COVID trauma as what everyone else is. But in addition to that, we're also going through the normal everyday trauma of being an Indigenous Australian, which unfortunately is becoming, you know, an everyday thing. You know, I remember back to when I'm 53 now, and I remember back to when I was 12 years old, and a friend of mine and myself ran away from high school. We were in year 7 in Queensland. We ran away from high school. And when we were found 12 hours later, my friend, who was white, didn't have an Aboriginal father, you know, she just got sort of like a tap on the, you know, tap on the hand, everything's going to be all right, your parents love you, you know, it'll be fine. Where I was told that I would never, like quote for quote, that I would never become anything. And it was a complete waste of time that we were even assimilated. That was awful. That was to a 12-year-old girl. 12-year-old girl who had no idea of the world and, you know, no idea what was going on. But you know what? It fueled me furiously, because here I am at 53 years old, learning my language, teaching it to my children, teaching it to my grandchildren, and being the answers to the prayers. Now, when it comes to not wanting to be here, people call it suicide. There are quite a few people who don't call it suicide. They say, you know what, I just want to go and be with the ancestors. I'm done with this time. I just want to go back and I just want to be with them and have them care for me. And it's a hard one, because it's not up to us. It's not up to us as to how long, you know, we've been here for. And to feel so down, to feel so lonely, to feel so isolated from your community that you would choose taking your own life and going back to your ancestors, that's huge, absolutely huge. Now, let me tell you that when I was 19 years old, I was a single mum, 2 kids, 2-year-old and a 3-month-old. Everyone told me, the story that everyone was telling me was that I was worthless, that I slept around, that I was never going to be a good mum, all these stories that are around there. And I actually packed my kids up one day and I put everything that they owned in a box and I took them over to their dad's house and I gave them a kiss and I left them there. And then that night when I went home, I took an overdose of sleeping tablets. Now, I wasn't necessarily depressed. I wasn't necessarily sad. But the only story that had ever been told to me was that I was female and I was going to be a mother, and that I was, back then they called it part Aboriginal, you know, that I was part Aboriginal and I would never become anything. So with those 2 stories intertwined, I ended up with the story that I was never going to be anything. I couldn't be a mum. I couldn't achieve anything in this particular world. So I tried to take my own life. Now, luckily for me, and I'm extremely grateful, let me tell you, because at 53, I have 4 children and 5 grandchildren, which is absolutely fantastic. But, you know, that night, I got a call from, I think it was the Salvation Army, where it was incredibly difficult to find a place in housing for a young mum with one kid. So you can imagine how incredibly difficult it was for them to find a place for a teenage mum with two kids. And that night, they actually rang me, well, they tried to ring me, to tell me that they'd found me housing. And the person that I was living with, my flatmate, was so excited that she tried to come and wake me up. She thought I was napping, and she actually saved my life, which was wonderful. But the reason I tell that story is because we have this image of this, what a suicidal person looks like, you know, that they've given up all hope, that you know, they've done something that's just so against humanity, or, you know, they're just so down with themselves, that sort of stuff. It's not like that. We're just stories. That's all we are. We're just stories. And somewhere along the line, some arsehole comes along and they take the pen. They determine, you know, what the end of the story is, and we accept it. We don't realise that we can take that pen back and that we can write the end of it, you know, ourselves. It's incredibly difficult when you've gone through a childhood where society tells you that you're crap, you know, school tells you that you're crap. You might have come from a loving family, but you get, you know, people treating you like crap outside of that. It's this story that just bombards you. And then you get to adulthood and it's like, oh, well, you'll be okay. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, that's really, like, you just, what you brought to my mind was, you know, a lot of people, when they do get to that stage, they feel like there is no help and there is no one that they can speak or reach out to. And that's what I noticed within First community. You just see a lot of people just, you know, going into themselves and not expressing themselves, and not saying, hey, you know, this is how I'm feeling, I need help. And that's the step that we as First Nations people need to get to. Like, you know, we're all dealing with a lot of these mental health issues and a lot of these background issues that we don't know that we're struggling with until we reach out and ask someone and say, hey, like, I'm feeling like this, you know, I don't know what it is. Can you help me understand? And yeah, and we need to all just understand that it's okay to feel those things, and it's okay to feel that way, because we all go through them and we all struggle, and we're all there. We're all probably feeling the same things as First Nations people, and we just need to speak and talk about it. That was beautiful. Thank you, Jetta.
No problem.
Mitch, I'll pass it back to you and
Back.
pass the baton back.
I'm trying to absorb it all, and now you want me to go and present. It's like, nah. Aunt Deb, I'm back. I'm sorry, you've been patient, but I'm not finished with you yet. I've got more questions, Aunt. I'm ready. I hope you're ready. So with that said,
bring it on.
What do you think we can do, Aunt, to create a deeper sense of belonging within the art space?
Yeah. Look, 12 years ago, I decided to create a company, Short Black Opera. Seemed like a wild kind of thing to do, create a First Nations opera company in Australia, but we did it. And it attracted so many singers, so many talented singers came. And Carl, Jimmy, if I'd known about you, I would have been coming for you, mate. And those singers were people who held a dream in their heart that they wanted to sing classical music, and we provided an environment in which they could develop. But alongside them, in telling the story of my first opera that I wrote, Pecan Summer, which is the story of the walk-off from Cumragunja Mission Station, my grandmother's story as it happens, we had a mixed cast. We had white singers alongside our beautiful array of First Nations brand new opera singers. And in that very first season of Pecan Summer, where we had these seasoned opera singers who'd had careers, you know, Opera Australia and sung around the world, these non-Indigenous singers. We finished the first series of workshops leading up to opening night, and I'll never forget this. One of the most experienced singers, non-Indigenous singers, came to me and said, I have never had a sense of community like this. I've never understood this sense of belonging before. I don't know how I'm going to deal with re-entry into the rest of my life. He had seen what a decolonized world was, and he wanted that. And there were others in that company who did, and not everybody. Not all of the non-Indigenous cast members got there, but over a period of time, more and more. It was like we were taking some sort of cataracts off their eyes, and they could see the strength of our community and our knowledge and our belonging and our culture, and they wanted it. And over the period of the last 12 years of short black opera's history, we've seen, particularly in Melbourne, that there are more and more organisations that are coming to us and saying, we want that. How do we get that? And I said, well, you have to go from not knowing to knowing. You know what? That's not enough. You have to take the next journey, the critical journey, and that is from knowing to understanding. And lived understanding is wisdom. Now, I'm not saying that it's our job to educate all these gubbers. That's exhausting. And I know that it is our experience on a daily basis. But what I want us to be is discerning. I want us to look out there into the arts landscape and know that there are people who are trying to decolonize the space. We're the 3%. We need the 97% to do their share of the work, right? And there are people trying to decolonize, but we need to be discerning because there's a trap. There's a trap that I see artists fall into all the time. When they're asked to be the so-called Indigenous content in someone else's story. What Jetta was saying, they're so important. You need to take up the pen. You need to write that song, that story, that narrative. You need to drive it. You know, we have a saying at Short Black Opera, world domination proceeding, and we believe that. We have demanded that the spaces we work in are decolonized spaces, and more companies are doing that. There are so many strong First Nations companies emerging in the landscape. I reckon that if we can commit, if we can show that duty of care to our own community first, and let the non-Indigenous people know that they need to decolonize, that it's not our mess to clean up, that they need to do that work, and there's such a tool as Google that can actually find out information now. It's incredible. Who knew? I usually set, when I'm doing a keynote address to a bunch of, you know, people who are desperate to know, and the first thing they say to me is, oh, I didn't learn any of this in school. And I say, well, neither did I. I say to them, here's your homework. Every night, just for this week, you watch NITV news.
Yeah.
You view the world through an Indigenous lens. It's that simple. You can do it with your remote control button. You have to do some of the heavy lifting. But I want our people to be discerning about the choices they make, about the opportunities they take. We have a duty of care to one another. It's that collective consciousness that Jimmy was talking about before. That is so incredibly important.
For sure, Aunt. It's yeah, I love that. You know, the message of, you know, we got to be a bit more discerning, because it's very interesting. You know, I got asked not long ago if I'd do a voiceover for something, but it was like, oh, we just need an Aboriginal voice, and I was like, oh, yeah, sweet. And then it was, but we kind of need you to sound, Aboriginal. I said, well, you're here. I'm right here. This is the sound, baby. Let's go. I was like, no, but, kind of like, oh, you mean, here, come here, my butter boy. Oh, yeah. I said, I can't do that. Sorry. I can't do it, And it's funny, Art, because, opportunities will present, but then it's on our shoulders to discern whether that is setting the narrative for, 2021 and where we want to head as a people, because opportunities will come, and it's like, this is the sound of a black fella voice right here. What more do you want? Or is it too academic? Is that the issue?
Don't wait to be invited into your own life. I mean, if I'd waited to be invited to, or to be included in the classical music scene in Australia, I'd still be waiting.
Yeah.
I decided to make those opportunities for myself, and start out on whatever scale I could begin on. Way back in the day, just little shows that I put on to, community audiences, and I built it from there.
Yeah.
And honestly, I say no more than I say yes to non-Indigenous opportunity now, because I don't want to be part of somebody else's story. I might allow them to be part of mine.
Yeah. Beautiful, Art. So with that said, moving forward, how do you feel we can support one another as a First Nations arts community better to get to a point, I suppose, where we're having more conversations frequently like we're having tonight, about breaking down barriers, moving forward, supporting one another, talking about sensitive topics. How do you feel we can do better, I guess, to support one another in opening up and providing that safe space?
Yeah, well, tonight's a really important step. And the series, it's just so important what we're doing right here. But understanding that we have this duty of care to one another, and that our whole culture is based on reciprocal relationships, and realizing that in giving, giving is the most empowering act, in giving of yourself to other members of your community, and supporting front up to that gig, It doesn't matter how big or how small, be there for each other. That is so vital. Comment, go online, say that encouraging word. You'll find that you get so much strength from that yourself, because you are investing into a collective community that it surrounds you, and it's not just one-dimensional. We're not just living in this dimension. Our ancestors are with us. Yeah, we're the promise of 200 years, but they are with us still. So finding that strength within you to encourage, to become a mentor, even when you think that maybe you don't have anything to give, that encouragement is something you can always give.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Art. Very insightful. So much to take away. So much. Jimmy.
My brother.
My brother.
Nyinda, what's up?
My brother, let's do this. I got more for you too. I'm sorry. Hashtag not sorry. How can we provide more support to our music and arts community, and also spread awareness to support our mob? I mean, how do you think we can do this better? And I suppose to add a little bit more on top of it, do you think it's possible to turn intergenerational trauma into intergenerational trauma healing? I mean, I'm someone who loves to be positive. I'm also a realist, but do you think we can do this? So it's a 2-in-1 question, because you're worth it.
Let's start with the first part. What can we do? I guess the first thing is, who we defining as we. So let's say we're talking about the broader general community.
Sure.
If there's booking agents out there and you don't have a black artist on your roster, that's a you problem. That's because you didn't make the space for it. It's not because the black talent's not there. And if you want the next Baker Boy, if you want the next Mitch Tambo, if you want the next King Stingray, if you want the next Briggs, then you got to make some space on your roster for black talent. And I think that extends to females. I think that extends to people that don't identify with those terms, that might identify with other terms. and have different gender expressions or orientations. But part of it's not just booking agents, it's publicists. It's not just publicists. It's not just booking agents. It's managers. It's us. It's if you're doing small time gigs and you're putting on the bill amongst other bands. If all the other bands look exactly like you, that sucks. That night sucks. I don't want to go and see 15 white boys play. You know what I mean? There's a place for everyone. Make some space for everyone else. If you're hogging the table, scoffing it down, then, you know, that gluttonous sort of generic sound that constantly makes its way into shows, it's boring. It's boring. We already had that. So we're going to miss out. We're just going to miss out on talent. We're going to miss out on the next big thing. So it's financially smart. It's great business. It's great for social well-being. And there's the things we can do is make sure that we bring those things like that cultural awareness into those spaces. And what I'm seeing is more booking agents, more people in this space leaning into this opportunity and hearing the message, and they've seen the writings on the wall. People are making space more and more. Those festivals that do those acknowledgements of country, the storytelling, bringing Black stories to the forefront. And you know, our allies, I just ask people to hold that space for Black artists so that we can step into that space. As for intergenerational healing, is it possible? Oh my, yes, it is possible, of course. But the scars don't disappear. But and we carry those scars. But hold the burden of Australia's original sin with us. Don't let us carry it alone. Don't sit there and tell me you're my ally, that you're not racist. If you're anti-racist, that is a doing word. You have to be active in that. And sometimes the biggest activity you can do is listen with your heart. Listen with this one here, with your gupra, with what makes us who we are. And I think if for non-Indigenous people, sit with us, sit in that uncomfortability with us. Don't leave us here, because you've got all the benefits for what's occurred. We've taken all the toll from it and still here. All we're asking is to come and sit with us and empathize with us. More empathy, less apathy, you know. And the only other little one, I guess, is the sincerity to recognize that when another human being is hurting, to be able to see your own experience in it. Now, I'm not talking in a narcissistic way. I'm just saying that if some people don't understand what Aboriginal people have gone through, if you've not been educated on it, if you can't fundamentally understand it, lean in with curiosity rather than judgment. Come with an empty cup and we'll fill it up for you. Don't come with a full cup of ideas and then tell me what our problems are. So, you know, what we want is those listeners. We want those listeners that are not listening just with these ones, but this one here. And I believe this country's potential could be phenomenal. And I think all Aboriginal people, when we make this criticism of the nation at different points in times or of society, we're not saying it to get square. We're not saying it to hurt you. Those things will never amount to what others have gone through. We're saying it because we believe in the potential of this society to do great things together. We've asked for reconciliation. And right now it's for white people to reconcile with the truth. It is not for us to reconcile with white society. We have not done anything wrong. We are not going to be victim blamed. So those are the thoughts that I would leave with. Make space for Black artists, become culturally aware, lean in industry. There is room for this to work together, and we can make a richer, stronger music industry. We can make a stronger, richer Australian culture together.
Boom. Diddle boo, brother. Too strong, too deadly. Makes sense. Think it's very easy. If you're someone looking to find ways in or make your contribution, I think you made it very easy to, you know, take those words and go and run with it. So thanks very much, brother. I really appreciate it. Now, Yurallarai, the border, Gomeroi Nation, Yama Yama, Jettison.
Yama yama.
I was not going to miss you tonight. I'll tell you that right now. Too close.
Indeed, indeed.
So with that said, first of all, I mean, got to acknowledge your incredible work. You know, to be working on the helpline there of Support Act, what incredible work, what much needed work. You know, to have a place where a mob can ring up and feel safe and know that gonna, on the end of the other line is another black fella that, you know, half the battle's won, you know, in terms of understanding and all the rest of it. So thank you so much for your work. And with that said, working at Support Act's helpline, where do you see a lack where people just aren't, you know, reaching out or engaging? Do you feel like there's a lack around certain topics or conversation? And if so, how do you think, you know, we could change that, or as a community, as a collective, I suppose, create or normalize a situation where our mob feels safe to pick up the phone, hit that number? Because I know that, you know, for the AMS, Blackfella Health Services, a lot of mob won't go there because they're going to know someone that knows someone. It's on the grapevine and all that business is out the window, you know? So talk to me.
Now, first up, can I say, I'm a narrative therapist, which means that I'm curious. I'm curious about stories. I'm curious about where they come from. And I want to say three very, very important things in that. One, your story is not fixed. It's not fixed. As long as you're breathing, right, there's possibility for change. Oh. The second thing is that your story is not owned by anyone else. Absolutely not. Right? It's completely yours. And the third thing, and I think we know this historically and communally, is that the way in which someone else tells your story does not define you at all. Doesn't define you at all. And as a community, we're so eager to know what's going on in other people's lives. I think sometimes we don't trust that if we told someone our story, if we told someone our version of our story, that they're going to laugh at it, or they're not going to accept it, or it's going to go down the street, or, you know, something like that. Like, storytelling is just such a huge thing, you know, with our mob. But centuries ago, maybe thousands of years ago, I'm part of your family. So I care about what happens to you. So if you think of it in those terms, you know, when you're lifting up that phone to access EAP, okay, maybe you don't know the last name of the person who's on that phone, but I can guarantee to you that we have the same ancestry and that we understand the same problems because we've gone through them and we know where you're coming from. And that's what it's about. It's about sharing.
I love that.
Yeah, that was really beautiful.
Yeah. So with that said, though, how do you think, like, how do we create trust then, you know, within our community to you know, within our mob? Because even for me personally, I think I would be a bit, you know, next minute it's everywhere. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
How do we create trust, do you think?
I suppose that, you know, we get rid of shame by keeping in safe spaces.
Yep.
So we have to create those safe spaces, you know, regardless. I mean, you know, just before I apologise because I said the F word, well, realistically, I should be able to speak any way that I want to. You know what I mean? If I need to get it off my chest, I need to be able to use whatever language, you know, I feel that is necessary to actually get that done, and not feel that I have to be polite to someone, or not to be nasty, but when I talk, I need to know that you're interested in the way that I'm telling my story.
Sure. Not
that I have to tell it in a way that you will understand.
I'm going to go to you, Mitch. Is, you know, something that's been huge within our community. You see a lot of young First Nations people, you know, getting to that stage. And there's, you know, there's a lot of links towards online, becoming online now that we're so much online, and the bullying that happens online. So I guess my question for you, I wanted to get you to touch on your experiences as a musician and lateral violence, which is huge online, and coming from, you know, other First Nations people. So I guess I just wanted to know, how does that impact your work and promoting your work, and how does that also impact you, like, internally, the lateral violence that's happening online?
Wow, I love that you saved that question for me right at the end. Nah, you know what? It's funny because I think the last few years have been a real crash course for me, you know, breaking out into mainstream. But the thing is for all of us, and certainly for myself, there's a rude awakening, and that is when you get to a certain point of exposure, whether it's on TV or gaining a great social media following, you quickly learn that not everyone's for you.
No.
You know, as much as like you were, yeah, let's get it. Well, really quickly you'll learn that, oh no, some of my mob, my own blood aren't for me. You know, community, extended blackfellas, whatever. You know, just not for me and my message. And that's not taking shots. You know, I think if anything, it's a really hard conversation to open up and conversate about, because you feel like by talking about it, you're actually taking shots yourself. But it's not that, you know. And I had an interview the other day with Deadly Brother Johnsy. He's a Central Desert brother, and he put it on me straight away about it, because he had some things happen. He's like, you know, you're right, what's happened? And I just remember, you know, you grow up as a black fella, you represent your whole life, however you do, and that's your whole heart, right? But when you represent, you could be painted up in a lap, and you cop it from the outside community. I think it's really easy for us to just step up and become resilient, even if we don't want to be, like, and just bear that. But when it comes from internally, it's kind of really left field in a way, and it's the thing that hurts the most. And I know in my own experience, in terms of my mental health and stuff, it just rubbished me for a good while because I wasn't ready for it. The grapevine can be great, but at the same time, because everyone knows everyone on that grapevine, all of a sudden, you know, there was things about getting thrown around about my dad that passed away, mob that, like, cousins that I've never met speaking on my behalf. Like, it was crazy, you know, lots of things happened. And the thing that I learned quickly was, funnily enough, the transgenerational trauma that lived inside of me, because that was the first thing that was triggered. Unfortunately for me, though, I was on a journey going 1,000,000 miles an hour until Corona. And I remember being like 20 minutes before stepping on stage to contend for Eurovision, just in my wife's arms, bawling my eyes out. Just like, I don't know if I can do this. I can feel my great-great-grandmother next to me, like all this pain just oozing out. But what happened was that only come from the lateral. It didn't come from the outside. It was all the pressure from the inside, because I think for us, because, you know, I could look at all yous on the screen and come see you down the street tomorrow, and we'd just be like family. So it just hurts. It hurts a lot more, you know what I mean? Because of the way we're set up, our kinship, you know, and even with colonization and all the rest of it, we still inherently connect on that level because it's spirit-led, you know what I mean? It's like you can dilute our skin color, whatever you want to do, but you can't eradicate our ancestors that are in our spirit, you know? So we connect on that level. Anyways, I just realized quickly from a mental health standpoint that I had to go back home on country. I had to disconnect, and I had to regroup and almost find myself quickly. And I was just lucky that I got a strong family and I got strong mob in my community that I could outsource and go and sit with and have long conversations with and debunk it and kind of warrior back up and get ready for the next phase. But what I learned quickly out of it too is that I basically, you know, come to that crossroad. And I was like, you can either become bitter or find love in it all. And I realized that a lot of the pain, a lot of the toxicity coming at me was trauma. It was trauma driven. And the only thing that I can do is to try and not let that trauma become my trauma, and to love in return, you know, because in our community, well, in all community, you know, what we need is healing. We need love and acceptance. But with our mob, what we've been through, what we need more than ever is to be able to love one another and to celebrate one another's successes and kind of be okay with that. But that's not also our reality, because we're all working through something. You know, like Aunt Deb said before, we're all impacted by the stolen gen. We're carrying something. We're all trying to work it out. I'm trying to work it out, you know. So it's really sticky. But I think when it's online and you're already isolated, like in a pandemic or whatever, you can feel super isolated really quickly, because as you know, those comments can come out like a machine gun. And we forget that whoever it was has already moved on to the next person, and we're stuck laying awake all night over that one comment or whatever that shot was. So I think in it all, for my mental health's sake, I realized that I had to just let go, which was really hard though, because the one thing that you love with everything outside of your family is your culture, it's your mob, you know. So to try and not let it affect you is really hard, because it's easy for outside mob to go, you know, just harden up, you know what I mean? Have the teaspoon of concrete. But how can you though? Because my whole narrative is my identity. It's my culture. So the whole point of what I do is to be vulnerable enough to share my story and journey and what's come before me. It's not to be closed and to be like hard. It's to be a warrior in all this other way, you know, and that's how a lot of us operate. So it is a tightrope, but I think the best thing to do is just, you know, you got to find that quick support group. You know, it could just be a brother boy. It could be one person. It could be, your family, core family group, whatever. But you have to find that support group so you can have the long conversations with, you know, you can have a cry if you have to or whatever, but you just know you're not alone in it, and that a lot of the stuff that comes our way, it's seriously someone else's issues, you know. But I just think it hits differently with us mob, you know. It just hits that little bit different, because you hear so many celebrities come out or whatever from all walks of life go, you know, if you don't have haters, you're probably not doing something right. But it's different when it's like, yo, like, this for my mom. You know, it just hits different. So you just got to find that support, not go within and not let it derail you from your purpose, you know, and just keep moving forward. But it's just different, I think, for us, because you could be in Western Australia, hear something in New South Wales, but no, if I go to New South Wales for a gig, I know all these mob there. Or if I go to the end, you know, because we're just built different. You know, we've got these ancient song lines that are now contemporary, and we still navigate through them. You know, we're still that connected. And social media amplifies it tenfold. So it is what it is. And yeah, it's a hard one to answer. I probably didn't answer it, but I definitely spoke a lot.
You definitely answered it, and then you answered the question that I was going to ask. So I'm not going to ask that one, but no, thank you so much, Mitch, for your knowledge and your input. And yeah, I definitely see the impacts of that, because you're such a huge figure within the First Nations community. And I have to say, that performance you did on Australia's Got Talent, I bawled my eyes out. I cried because I could just feel like, you know, the ancestors there.
Thank you, my sister. I appreciate that. I think, you know, it's funny because we were having a yarn the other week, and, you know, when I connect to language, I don't feel like it's really me, you know, and that's the truth. I just feel like sometimes I'm just a light-skinned brother that just happens to be a bit of a vessel that's just carrying the heart of some ancestors that decided to pick me, you know, and it's a beautiful journey to be on. But it's funny though, because I believe we're all gifted in those ways differently, you know, and you don't have to look far. Like Uncle Archie, who sings predominantly in English, but you would swear he was just singing straight out old song lines, you know, when he opens his mouth, that spirit. And it's just a beautiful thing. I think that we all come from such a beautiful old sacred culture, and, you know, the way in which we decide to share those giftings in the creative space or however is, I guess, however we've been called by them old people. And it's a humbling, beautiful thing to be a part of.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Mitch.
No, thank you. And thanks to all the amazing, deadly panelists for jumping on board and speaking. you know, Aunt Deb, Jimmy, Jedison, and of course you, Carissa, and all the support mob there at Support Act doing their thing. I mean, through this time, they've really stepped up and gone above and beyond and provided those amazing quick turnaround grants for a lot of our mob, which has just been a lifesaver. I know so many mob that have just been able to pay bills and get by off that, and certainly create safe space. So big thanks to everyone, Gubbing Inda, to all the deadly panelists. And please, whatever you do, if you're out there, keep an eye out for the next Yarning Strong On My Mind First Nations series at Support Act, because we'll be discussing more of these deep topics, and certainly around healing and tools out there to use when we're going on our own healing journey. And I think that's a beautiful thing, you know, because sometimes some of us just don't know where to start. And to be able to open up these conversations is beautiful. And that's what I always say, you know, it's a real blessing for someone like me to have access to country, because that's a direct source to start healing, but not all of our mob have that. So to open up these conversations where we can throw around ideas and discuss starting points, I think is a real beautiful thing. So be sure to tune in from that. And the beautiful thing is it's from our perspective.
Yeah, definitely First Nations led. Thank you all again for joining this panel. It was beautiful to have, like, you know, different insights to different things and all of your experiences mixed up together. One more important thing I just wanted to remind everyone is that helpline is there available, 1-800 959 500 if you need to access it, and Jeddah is on the other end if you ask for her. She will definitely be there to talk to you and help you through whatever you need support with. I also wanted to thank Music Backpackers and the Australian government for supporting these workshops that we're doing. I want to thank Cooper Lilly, who has been an amazing support and helping drive these workshops. And again, thank you to every one of you for making time to come on and join this panel. I hope everyone has a beautiful day and everyone stays safe. Thank you.
Thank you to you too, Carissa.
Thank you, Carissa.
You wouldn't be here.
Thank you.